More with Kirk McElhearn on the HomePod and why how you listen to music may affect your smart speaker choices. This is MacVoices. This edition of MacVoices is supported by the MacVoices Dispatch, our weekly newsletter to keep you up on all the latest from MacVoices. Watch or listen to MacVoices straight from your email client. Sign up at macvoices.com/newsletter and stay up to date. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. This is part two in a two-part conversation with Kirk McElhearn about the cancellation of the Apple HomePod and why. In the first part, we talked about some of the specific characteristics of the Apple HomePod and how they did or did not meet expectations, the cost issues, and a number of other aspects to it. This time, the conversation, though, shifts to us, how we listen to music, and why that can make a difference in the speakers and the online streaming services we select. Let's go back to it. Well, and again, you took me someplace I wanted to go because that's the next question. If you go to, here in the States, if you go to Best Buy or a big box store, whatever you can find, or just go online, you can find plenty of receivers or amps that have AirPlay 2 built in. And so that's, but again, you're investing in that piece of equipment, plus then you've got to choose your speakers. And that may be just for someone that is an audiophile that really cares that much about it.
I've always felt that the best way to get audio, I wrote something years ago about the best way to get audio from your computer is to plug your computer into an amplifier and put real speakers on your desk. None of these little computer speakers that are pointing up or whatever. Real bookshelf speakers. I got a pair that are about this tall, small bookshelf speakers. I've always felt that if you care about the sound, the importance of speakers speakers to me are the most important. You can there are a lot of good companies that make AirPlay amplifiers. I had a couple of Yamaha, what they call network receivers over the years, and they were really excellent. You can use them with AirPlay even over Ethernet. Most people don't know that AirPlay works over Ethernet, but if you have an AirPlay device, it's on your network connected to an Ethernet cable. And in my case, I was using a power line adapter. Then it works fine. Yamaha's an excellent brand for that sort of thing. I think Marantz also makes some very good AirPlay compatible receivers. And in that case, you have all the choices from speakers that are, 6 inches tall to tall, the standalone column speakers. And you're not limited to what is available where the amplification and the receiving is in the speakers. So on the one hand, if you want the minimalism, I think those KEFs are ideal. They're really good sound from what people have told me, people who know this stuff. No wires running to wherever your amplifier is. But for less money, you can get a $200 Yamaha network amp that has AirPlay 2 and, a very good pair of speakers. So it's a balance depending on what people want. When I replaced I had a very large Yamaha receiver, and I was looking where the receiver was over on this like credenza here, and I was thinking, this just takes too much space for what it does. It's just playing music. I don't need all this stuff. And that's when I bought the Sonos amp shortly after the Sonos amp came out, because it's small, it's minimal. I wanted to just get everything out of the way. If you want that pile of gear, which was, big in the 70s and the 80s, it's available. But if you want things that are smaller, the Sonos amp is a great choice for someone who doesn't want too many dials to fiddle with or doesn't want too many inputs, because it doesn't have a lot of inputs. For me, I think more and more people don't want the pile of gear unless they're really, really into audiophile stuff. And there are lots of options today to get away from that.
Yeah. It is, again, this is why the next track is so much fun to listen to, is because the tagline is how people listen to music today. And it has definitely changed, even for somebody like me that, wants the neighbors 3 doors down to be able to hear it. And somebody like you who spends a fair amount of time with classical music, we have changed our habits. So we pay more attention than the average person, but we have changed. So, and that's why.
We grew up in the times when the stack of gear was important, and we wanted to have that stack of gear. We wanted to see it. I mean, I still lust after those 1970s amplifiers with all the knobs and buttons and the VU meters, because there's just something that it's like, I don't know, it's like looking at a muscle car from the 70s, right? It's just the look on there is so cool. But on the other hand, I don't need that to listen to music. And we evolve, and our ability to listen to music has evolved. The fact that I can pick up my iPhone, access 70 million tracks on Apple Music, stream them to my speakers in seconds, that just obviates the need for all the cruft. In fact, it's, I think, in part, the simplicity of accessing music now makes people not want the complication of playing music that we used to have.
That's well said. Yeah.
There are people who want the ritual of taking the LP out, putting it on the thing, and listening to a side. But most people, as long as the starting up of the music is simple, the whole playback experience can be simple today.
And that's what I think I potentially will miss with the loss of the HomePod. If I were let's just say something happens to my HomePods tomorrow, then I'm not going to have the ability to say, hey, S lady, play this. That there's going to be a little more friction to it. And I've become spoiled. There's no question about it. I've completely become spoiled by that, so that, if I want that, and I frequently do, then I will lose that. So that's, I guess, maybe is where my disappointment is coming from with this.
I rarely know what I want to play like that, or if I do, getting Siri to understand it is literally impossible. I discovered some jazz musician just last night. So I'll go to Apple Music and I'll tap on the categories and I'll browse around. And so this guy is named, hold on, I'm getting my iPhone up, recently played, Nick Bertsch. B-A with an umlaut, R-T-S-C-H. If I were to ask Siri to play Nick Bertsch, do you think Siri would play anything other than, I don't know, ABBA or, the Bee Gees or something? Siri does not understand everything. Siri understands 80% of stuff in English, but that 80% is, no, probably 20%. Let's be honest. Because anytime you've got something with weird pronunciations or spelling, if I ask Siri to play The Grateful Dead, it's going to play like the best of The Grateful Dead. Now, that's like asking a sommelier in a restaurant for a bottle of wine, and they give you like some cheap, Manischewitz instead of something good. It's the dumbing downness of it, and the inability of Siri to find what I want. Let's say I want to listen to a Brad Mehldau album. He's my favorite jazz pianist. I don't remember the names of all the albums. I honestly don't. I do remember the album artwork, so I can go through the list and say, yes, that one. That's Art of the Trio Volume 4. That's the one I wanted to listen to. But otherwise, my Siri listening doesn't do that. And you heard us on the next track. I don't remember which episode it was, but we were talking about the sort of funnel of audio requests into Siri and other smart speakers, Alexa and the like, that since you can't remember all the music you want to listen to, if all you're doing is requesting it with your voice, you've just got a small amount of music that you're going to be able to remember, right? Are you going to remember the name of every single album that you've got in your library? It's not like that. It really isn't.
No, you bring up a completely legitimate point. I guess, maybe it's just me being spoiled by what I've had, that at those times, you're right. I can't remember every album that Motorhead put out. But, sometimes I know that this is the track I want to listen to. And
right. Okay. So when you ask Siri to play a song, what does Apple Music play next?
I don't know. That's a good question, because I tend not to use it that way.
So you'll listen to one song, and then when it ends, you'll ask for another song?
Usually.
Okay. See, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I don't really listen to music in order to be like a call and response DJ in my home. and even, no, but just think of it. You're at a party, right? You want to make a playlist for your party. You're not going to stop each time and call out the next song. While the first one's playing, you're going to think about what would be good afterwards. You can't interrupt Siri and say, by the way, play this song next. So ideally, you do it on your phone or your iPad. You build the playlist while you're listening, rather than saying, okay, that's over. Now I want to listen to this.
Yeah, I guess I mean, I guess it depends on what your situation is. To build a playlist like that for a party or something, absolutely. If I'm working in the basement and, I think of something and want to hear that while I'm working, and then, okay, that's over. Maybe it's reminded me of something or something else has happened that, yeah, okay, I'd like to listen to this next. Or just hey, play this album X or, playlist Y. But I guess I've started somewhere with a single request and moved on. That's more the way that I use it. But here we are. We're talking about the way that people interact with their music. So what's right for me isn't right for you, and vice versa.
No, of course not. Of course not. But my point is simply that depending on Siri means you're going to be getting less music than if you're actually looking and browsing your library or browsing the Listen Now section or what's new. Do you use the Apple Music radio stations?
Never.
Now I find the best feature of Apple Music is you press the Siri button or you say, "Hey, lady, play some music." And in that case, they start playing your personal Apple Music radio station, which is built from songs in your library, songs that you've loved, songs that you've played a lot. And I find it extremely good most of the time. My only problem is I like rock music, like Grateful Dead and stuff. I like blues. I like jazz. I'm learning to play the shakuhachi, so I listen to shakuhachi music. It's a Japanese flute. I don't know if you've ever seen a shakuhachi, but here's one.
I've heard you talk about it, but
yeah. So sometimes the radio station will play Grateful Dead. Sometimes it will play 1970s punk. Sometimes it will play blues. Sometimes it will play jazz. But I can't say play my radio station, but only the jazz stuff. And it's like almost random. If I'm in the kitchen cooking, I want something that moves a little bit. And then if it comes up with like Brian Eno ambient music, that doesn't fit.
This is really interesting, and we're kind of off topic, but it relates to how we're going to use these smart speakers and the services. But I never sit down and say, "Gee, let's see what's on Netflix tonight." I have a playlist.
My God, you're the only person in the world. You don't do the Netflix shuffle? You don't sit there for 45 minutes trying to find a movie to watch and end up giving up and not watching anything?
No.
Everyone does that.
But it's the same thing with music. I'm very intentional about what I want to listen to. That doesn't mean I won't, when we finish this, I won't turn to iTunes, to my library, flip through it and say, oh, I haven't heard that album for a while or whatever. But that is intentional. I just don't say, hey, pick something random from my library, because the library is too diverse. And, I might, St. Patrick's Day is coming, so, I might want something, of that nature. The Dropkick Murphys, maybe, or Flogging Molly, just because, okay, that's in my head because of somebody mentioned St. Patrick's Day.
Or some real Irish music from real Irish people.
Yeah, well, see, there you go. But, that's the way I approach music. But I know a lot of people that just, they're happy with whatever. I'm sorry, but to my way of thinking, whatever fluff comes out of the
wallpaper. That's what I said. Wallpaper. And that's why playlists are so popular on the streaming services. The kind of playlist that the streaming services or other companies create. That's why they're so popular.
I go back to what you said about the wine example. I feel like that for so many of those, that's what I'm getting, is I'm just getting the greatest hits or the top 10 tracks or whatever. And okay, I love those tracks, but after a while, you got to be careful because you can play them to death so they no longer do anything for you.
But so think how radio used to work. Let's just say, AM radio, not FM, because we grew up in the days when FM was very different from AM. There was a top 40 or a top 100 or whatever, and there would be a playlist, and they would have a certain number of songs that they would have to play every day. The station managers would decide what was in the playlist. The DJs didn't have any freedom here. And you'd have to play the hit song every 2 hours. You'd have to play the second hit song every 2 hours, etc. But you'd have this rotation going through the day of music that was recent enough for the most part that people who listened to the radio would be familiar with it, but was new enough that they weren't tired of it. Over time, new music would get added to the playlist, old music would get removed, and you'd always have this sort of constantly turning playlist of music from about the past month, right? Some things a bit longer if they're really popular. That's what people wanted. They wanted They wanted to hear the same thing over and over. They wanted to hear music that's new. They didn't want to hear old music. If they did, they went to the golden oldie station. And they wanted that repetition to recognize songs more than once in a day if they're listening a lot. Most people never wanted to have to choose music for themselves. And again, that's why playlists are so popular on these services. What does Apple Music highlight the most? You go to any of the different, what they call categories now, what we would call genres, and you've got the new releases, but also you've got the playlists. This playlist is updated. The latest rap hip hop playlist is updated. The latest alt country playlist is updated. And they expect people to just go to those playlists the same way we used to listen to AM radio. That those playlists would be rotating, and every couple weeks something would come in, something would go out. And that's what most people listen. Most people don't store stuff in their library. Most people don't search categories. It's just a minority of people.
And I guess that, maybe I'm sit firmly in the minority.
We're old, Chuck. We grew up in different times. We don't understand today's youth. Now, to be fair, a lot of young people are real music obsessives. My son is always discovering weird stuff and telling me about the music he's found, but that's really exceptional. I think the majority of people just don't care that much. But bring this back to the HomePod. As long as the HomePod is a Siri device, and as you say, you can tell Siri to play something, that's fine. But as long as you can get a $99 version and do exactly the same thing, and if people don't care about sound quality, then it's clear which one they're going to go for.
And I find myself, and I'm a little embarrassed by this because I just looked in the mirror, so to speak, and realized that I argue constantly about the geeks who are complaining about how Apple is changing the Mac OS and simplifying it and doesn't give you access under the hood. And now I'm sitting here, I'm one of those guys who's saying, this is what I want. I want under the hood a little more with these capabilities. And Apple is saying, no, we're making devices the way people are using them today, which they should. So that they are right.
But see, I kind of wonder about the future of Apple with audio, and we remember the iPod Hi-Fi, which looked like a bread box, and you stuck an iPod in the top of it, and it was a neat idea. I'm told it sounded good. I lived in France at the time. I don't think it was ever sold there. I think Apple should be I expect Apple to be an audio company because music has been so important for Apple. As I said at the beginning of this, I think abandoning the HomePod with nothing to replace it suggests that they're not going to do that. If they were coming out with a HomePod Pro, they would have announced that and at the same time discontinued the HomePod. So I kind of wish Apple would come up with a couple different speakers. I'd like to see a portable speaker. I'd like to see a high-end speaker. And I'm talking, a good high-end speaker, not the HomePod kind, but something much better. I just think that Apple's kind of given up on music. Once Apple Music came along and people didn't buy CDs and they're not buying from the iTunes store anymore. I mean, this was a change in the way people consumed music, but Apple should have maintained something around audio. And they're doing this with headphones, and they're doing this quite well with headphones, with everything from the Airpods to the Beats line. They have a wide range of headphones and just one speaker. It's kind of weird that they wouldn't have more.
And you bring up a really interesting point with the AirPods Max that, they have everybody's screaming about the price of that. And yet the people that are buying them and the people that have reviewed them that are used to that level of that level of headphone are very impressed. I mean,
yes, but how many people were impressed by the HomePod and it's discontinued today?
That's
probably
my point.
Because of the price.
That's my point. So,
I think the AirPods Pro is way too expensive for what it is. You can get really good headphones for less. Plus, the case is ugly. Let's face it. I think it's not well thought out. I would not buy that because I'm not really a headphone listener. Everyone says they're really heavy. And that doesn't seem like the ideal type of headphone. And I kind of wonder why they did this. And it's bad timing for them. They came out with this and then the pandemic hits and, people use this in buses and trains because it's noise canceling. That would be the ideal time. But maybe the AirPods Pro are going to fail the same way that the HomePod did because it's just overpriced, because the market just isn't there for that. I mean, Apple stuff is always a bit more expensive, but it's not that much more expensive. Take the Sonos One, multiply by two, and you're around the price of the HomePod. The iPhone is not twice the cost of a similar Android smartphone. An iMac is not twice the cost of a similar spec Dell with the similar display. And I think that in audio, it just reminds me of when they were introducing the Apple Watch the first time, and here's the Apple Watch in aluminum, and here it is in stainless steel, and the look on Tim Cook's face when he had to say that gold watch was starting at $10,000. Never forget that. And, come on, was there anyone in our line of work, Mac punditry or whatever, who expected that gold Apple Watch to last? No one did. And that was like a vanity project for Johnny Ive. And, Apple, it was embarrassing that they were selling that Apple Watch for $10,000. It really was, when you consider that, Apple tries to make products for everyone. And the HomePod's not that extreme price, but it's certainly at a price that makes people think. So when you're selling a product, you have to create desire, but you have to create attainable desire. And people put psychological value on the different types of things that they buy. And some of it's based on what they see around. If you're going to buy a new car, you know that cars can go from, I'm just guessing here, $10,000 to $10 million, right? But the sweet spot's like what, $20,000, $30,000. So you see a $50,000 car, it's too much for you, right? You just exclude it right away. But if you were prepared to spend $25,000 and you see one is $28,000, you might do it. And I think so the HomePod just went above that psychological price limit of what people were prepared to pay for a speaker.
I don't disagree with you. I think one thing they could have done that might have helped, and yet we just discounted it earlier, was I would have liked to have seen a discounted price for a pair.
Yeah.
That might have made a difference. Or to your point, people were listening to Echo Dots, with little single speakers, and they didn't seem to mind. So who knows?
I think the audio technology in the HomePod is quite interesting. The way it tunes itself 38,000 times a second or whatever, which is, of course, excessive. But the way it can tune according to its surroundings, it's an interesting thing. The 7 tweeters that are in a circle, they can change their volume and all. But have you ever noticed that in real use? So my thought is, and I can't test this because you need to do this in a laboratory, is that the device can detect where it is in a room by the return echo off the wall. So if you're putting it right in front of a wall, the back speakers are going to know they're next to a wall because the audio comes back quicker. Now, theoretically, that means that the volume of those back speakers is going to be lower, so the front speakers can be louder, which is what it should be. You don't want it coming out the front when you don't want it coming out the back when no one's listening there, but you do want something coming out the back to create the spatial effect as it bounces off the wall and comes out a few milliseconds later. And the concept is interesting, but I never noticed anything that sounded like it just sounds like a sort of faux 3D sound, which you get in a lot of things. It never really sounded. If you're going to sell something with that, you've got to be able to deliver, and people have to be able to hear it. And I don't think anyone ever heard that.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a quandary, because if I heard it, then I'm not sure that it would be doing its job. So, but to your point, you could never adjust it. So how would you know?
Well, you would hear it by clarity is I think what you would get. And slightly more spaciousness, because the Sonos One, as the comparison, is just 2 speakers facing forward, and you don't get that ambience. You would hear a different clarity coming from the HomePod, but I never really I compared the two, and I didn't really hear that much of a difference, just because it's so subtle that you wouldn't notice it unless you're in a perfect room, perfectly treated for listening to audio. And in that case, you're not buying $300 speakers, you're buying $3,000 speakers.
Right.
So they did work on some interesting technology, and it would have been nice to see them go further, but at a higher price point for something really good. I would like to see a single unit with stereo slightly pointed out, and there's a lot of them now, the sort of wide, not soundbar type thing, but the kind of thing you'd put on a shelf, that sort of stereo separation that we were talking about earlier, where instead of coming from the sides and making a sweet spot in the middle, it spreads out from the center. And there are a lot of examples of speakers like that now. That's what I would like to see Apple do, something that you're going to get a broader sound in stereo without worrying about the positioning of the speakers. But again, I don't think they're going to do anything more. I think the HomePod Mini is the smart speaker for home automation. And if you remember in the introduction of the product, they talked a lot about home automation, and I think it's a big deal for them. If there was going to be a HomePod Pro, we would have seen it by now. I doubt that if we have an Apple event next week, the rumors are the 23rd for like new iMac and maybe new iPad Pro, I doubt we'll see a HomePod Pro. If we did, they wouldn't have said this one is being discontinued.
I would agree with that. And just because they're discontinuing this doesn't mean that they won't try something again. So, I hope that by discontinuing this, it's been a fair amount of time since it was introduced, obviously. So I just don't want to see them bouncing in and out of the market so much. But the real tale will be how long will Apple continue to support the HomePod?
Yeah, and that worries me. Yeah,
and it doesn't worry me quite as much as maybe some situations, because with the HomePod Mini there's going to be a good reason to maintain everything. And
yeah.
I don't know enough about the internals of the two devices as to, well, gee, we can't do this. We can't make this change in the big HomePod, but we can make it in the minis. So
I don't think that. I think the kind of support that's necessary is for things like networking, and that, as you say, if they can do it for the small one, they can do it for the big one. So I don't see that ending anytime soon. But it's going to reach a time when it won't work, and there's no line-in jack. You can't plug something else in. You can't plug it into a stereo to get music out of it. If it stops working, it's dead. It's over. Yep. And, to be fair, the Sonos One, I don't think it has a line-in jack, does it? I don't think so. Some of the bigger Sonos devices do.
Don't know. I'd have to go and look. I'm really not sure.
Like their sound bars, and I think it's called the it used to be the Play 5, which was the wide on-shelf stereo kind of convex one, and that I had one of them years ago, and it had a line-in jack. In fact, I used to use that with an Airport Express.
Yeah.
So streaming my music to the Airport Express into that speaker. So I used it as a passive speaker instead of as a Sonos speaker.
Yeah. Well, this has been interesting. I didn't know where it was going to go. It went a lot of different directions, but I feel a little bit better about the fact that I've lost the main HomePod. Well, I used that phrase to start, and I'm losing it again. That I don't have that option of getting a new one. But on the other hand, they'll be around in the secondhand market for a while. So, if that's something you really want. Kirk, I want to make sure we let folks know where they can find you when you're not here talking music and HomePods, because you do a lot of different things.
As always, my website is kirkville.com, and articles, links to my podcasts, and more.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chuck. Good to talk to you again.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. We'll be back with more. I'd love to hear what you have to say about the HomePod Mini, your experiences, whether you two are disappointed or whether you're just as happy to see it go. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you MacVoices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.